Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the poem of the day for today, Thursday, August 14th, 2025. In past entries here, I've missed birthdays of important poets, and so the next day I did a poem sort of in their honor that was written by them. And last night I realized that I missed a death day of an important poet. August 18th is the day that William Blake died. And I just saw that mentioned somewhere online. So I decided that today would be a great day for us to read our second William Blake poem. And I read several of his poems this morning, trying to decide which one to go with, whether to go with something that was more canonical and familiar and anthologized, or whether to try to find something more of a deep cut. And I decided to settle on what is perhaps his most commonly read, commonly memorized, taught, anthologized poem, which is the Tyger. And it was published in 1794 as a part of Songs of Innocence and Experience. And this comes from the Songs of Experience portion. If you're not familiar with Songs of Innocence and Experience, Blake has poems of two types that are in conversation with one another in there. And so the Tyger is in conversation with the lamb, which is in the Songs of Innocence portion of that. But he did not intend for this to be a sort of one-sided virtuous thing. It wasn't songs of goodness and songs of evil. It was songs of innocence and experience, which he saw as these two sort of poles of life wherein a human being must reconcile their contradictions, not again to pick a side and to completely disregard or discharge the other, but that forming oneself and forming one's spirit was finding one's place within the contradiction that in the combination of innocence and experience provides for us. So I'm going to read the Tyger, and it's meant to represent something more ferocious than a lamb would be. A lamb is often thought of as um, feeble, part of a sort of bucolic spring scene, a representation of something pure that is sacrificed. Within the language of the Mass, for example, there's the metaphor of the Lamb of God. So the Tyger is sort of set up opposed to that. But what I think this poem provides for is a series of provocative rhetorical questions that are aimed some at the Lamb, some at the Creator themselves, and questions that the speaker knows cannot be answered because God does not speak in that way, but also the Tyger does not speak. And so these questions become lingering and incumbent upon the reader to contemplate and to find some sort of answer for as they work to reconcile those contradictions that I spoke of earlier. So here is The Tyger by William Blake. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain, in the furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, Did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? Okay, so this poem, as a lot of the poems that we read, I think is deceptively simple, and I think a lot of it, and what I mean by that is that it deceives in what appears to be simplicity. It's not as simple as it seems. And I think part of that comes from, again, the rhyming couplets, but also the consistent rhythmic pattern throughout that has some interesting turns and variations in it. So, formally, the poem has 6 stanzas, and each stanza has 4 lines, so that makes for a 24-line poem. And each stanza has an AABB rhyme scheme, even though it's a slant rhyme. So I and symmetry, at least in the way that we would pronounce it now, where I'm from, it's not symmetry, right? So there's a bit of a strain there. Yet skies, eyes, aspire, fire, those are more consistent. But what I think is interesting about the slant rhyme at I and symmetry is it also um, coincides with a change in the rhythm. Most of this poem is composed in trochaic tetrameter, um, which means 4 trochees, and a trochee begins with the stress and then the unstressed, which it's kind of an inverted iamb. So it's Tyger, Tyger, burning bright. But what's interesting then is that last bright is not finished. It does not end on a downbeat. And so it's kind of 3.5 trochees in the forests of the night. And what coincides with the ending on the emphasized beat is that each line in this poem also ends with a punctuation. So there's a bit of a pause there. It makes the verse a unit unto itself. But then if we look at line 4 and line 24, when the question is posed there about the creator, we switch then into iambs. Could frame thy fearful symmetry. So we get 2 when reading, from the end of line 3 to the beginning of line 4, we get 2 stressed syllables back to back. I'm going to read this with overemphasis on the meter so that you can hear what I'm talking about. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? Within those 2 lines, it's sort of like it ascends to a point and then it descends into that question. And that stanza is repeated first and 6th stanza with the only word changing that I can see here, could frame versus dare frame. And so to me, what I'm hearing in the 4th line is a question, almost a question of fact. Who made you this way? And then in the 24th line at the end of the poem, it's a bit more of a challenge or a bit more of a demand. Who would dare do this? And there's an ambiguity within the who would dare, which is to say, who would dare make something so strong and powerful and significant as you, Tyger? But there's also a why does this thing exist? This thing that's a representation of ferocity, and this thing that's an embodiment of experience. And so Blake is leaving those unanswered questions, the onus of those upon the reader to reconcile the things that are associated with the untamedness of the lion as a part of their own spirit and a part of their own experience. One last point I'll make is briefly throughout the poem, each stanza sort of progresses by what it focuses on with the lion. So, I'm sorry, with the tiger. The second stanza is asking kind of about the nature of the tiger, the burned fire in your eyes. The third is about the tiger itself, the nature of the tiger itself and its experience and its construction. The fourth asks more about kind of what tools were used in the framing and the formation of the tiger. And then the fifth one turns back to the heavens, turns to the celestial, asking about the stars throwing down their spears and watering heaven with the tears. The line that I think has the most impact on me, perhaps throughout the entire poem, is in that fifth stanza. It's the third line of the fifth stanza. Did he smile his work to see? And I think that's a turning point in the poem, and I think that is perhaps the big point or the big takeaway Blake wants, which is that those things that seem to us to be, perhaps the tiger's not mentioned as ugly, but perhaps it's ugly, perhaps it's inconceivable, perhaps it's chaotic beyond our comprehension or violent beyond our comprehension. I can recall watching nature documentaries and seeing some of the violence and the carnage in those that is just the way of nature, and it challenges our concept of nature as this peaceful and balanced place. It's balanced, I think Blake would say, but it's balanced between innocence and experience, and that the what we perceive as violent and uncaring is something that is a feature and not a bug of nature. For myself personally, I'm sort of repulsed by snakes, and I know that they serve a function within the food chain and the ecosystem, but I often wonder, um, if there is a creator and if this is a part of a design, explain snakes, right? And I think that's what that line, that question asks us to contemplate. Did he smile his work to see? Which makes you go outside of yourself and to realize that what might be frightening to you or what might even seem purposeless to you serves a greater purpose in the balance of nature, or perhaps in some grander plan of which you too are just some sort of small part, right? And if the creator that Blake is speaking about here smiles down upon you as an individual human or smiles down upon the lamb, there's equally a chance that that same creator smiles down upon the ferocious tiger or the terrifying snake. And so what that does, I think, is it makes us shift our perspectives about what we perceive within nature, but also within the day-to-day occurrences of our lives that might seem tired and undesirable and wearying and frustrating or baffling, and to look at it from a more objective perspective, and to even consider that actually someone looks upon those same things and smiles because they're created things. That's all I'm going to say with this poem today. There is a lot more to say, of course, and I'd be happy to hear from people if there's other lines that are of more significance or provoke more contemplation for you. But I hope you enjoyed the poem, and I wish you a peaceful day.